Gentlelady from Florida yields back. The chair will now recognize himself. Brian, I've told you on countless occasions you have the hardest job in all of law enforcement in South Carolina, and you do it so well. And one thing I'm so happy about today is you and your co-panelists are getting credit for trying to solve very, very difficult challenges. You also were a prosecutor in a former life, and it strikes me, you tell me if I'm wrong, it's tough to get a conviction, particularly a jury trial, beyond a reasonable doubt. 12 folks, hard to get them to agree. So what happens sometimes is you'll take a plea to probation because it's so much easier to revoke probation in front of a judge later on, and you get the same result. You go to the Department of Corrections, you just get to bypass the difficulty of a jury trial. How do you see most of the probation revocations coming into the SCDOC, and what can we do at that stage to kind of limit the inflow into your facilities?
Sure. So one of the things that came from the legislation and the sentencing reform oversight with Pugh and Senator Malloy was how people were revoked. And that is one of the reasons that, number one, we're not sending as many people to prison, but we're also not revoking for, say, technical violations. I spoke with Jerry Adger, who used to be my Inspector General of the Police Force, who was a former SLED agent, South Carolina Law Enforcement Division. And during his testimony last year, he said, you know, we would go tell someone they had to pay their fees, and if they, or you're going to jail, and if they couldn't pay their fees, guess what? We were furthering criminal activity because they would go find the money another way. So we work with them and find ways to work out the fees that they have to pay. And sometimes if we have to waive the fees so we don't send someone back to prison, that's what we do. But they try to do everything they can to avoid sending folks back to prison. With our youthful offender program, the one that used to be 50% recidivate, now it's 22%, we have graduated responses. We can put an ankle bracelet on. We can do more checks. We can say you can't go to this area. We can say you have to get a job. Or we can bring them back for a time, and then they leave. And we're seeing the success of that also.
Something was touched upon, I think it was Mark Walker from North Carolina, which is the perception of the broader public of criminal justice reform in general. I don't think you and I are going to be accused of being soft on crime, and we talk about it, given what we did in previous lives. But there is a perception, and sometimes, you know, because we live in a culture that's kind of dominated by episodes. You can have 90% of the people successfully part of a program, but that one episode where there's a recidivist or another crime committed tends to impact public perception. So what would you say to our fellow South Carolinians, as a former prosecutor who is not soft on crime, how not to be swayed by episodes of failure, but to go ahead and pursue both the diversion programs on the front end? I'm sure you had a tough time explaining to the victims of crime why someone was out on bond, particularly if they had a bunch of charges pending. So what would you say to the broader public about why it's still worth pursuing diversion programs, reentry programs, criminal justice reform, despite the fact that we're going to have episodic failures?
Well, as a grandson and a great-grandson of a police officer, and as a victim of a crime by someone who was out on bond and had been convicted before, who broke into my house, I, too, understand being a victim, but it's balancing. And in South Carolina, you know, it's a very fiscally conservative state. Saving those tax dollars and seeing the recidivism rate go down, not spending the $20,000 a year. Also, the public safety, our crime rate is down, and I think it's because of what we're doing. I think it's also because of employment, 4.1% employment. It's a magic bullet. When someone's working and participating in society as they're doing in Georgia and other states, I think that works. Education. 10th grade is the average education level of folks that come to the Department of Corrections, so getting an education. And maybe, you know, it's not college, maybe it's a technical, and you could start a job and you can start a business and you can grow it from there. I just had my air conditioner replaced. I know how much an AC repairman makes. I mean, it's a substantial living.
Yeah, this is my last question, and then we'll go to the gentleman from Wisconsin. There's been some discussion. I know Senator Booker, Senator Johnson from the great state of Wisconsin. It's bipartisan, what some people refer to as ban the box. There is, Judge, I think you'll appreciate this, there is a body of research that it actually, at least in one study, had a disparate effect on the very group that we're seeking to help. And even if that one study is an anomaly, I am a little bit concerned that some of the ban-the-box legislation doesn't have relief for negligent hiring. That's still a civil cause of action that you can pursue against someone for negligent hiring if they fail to ask. So it's not really a question as much as, particularly, Your Honor, you're an academic now, in addition to being a jurist. If any of the four of you have ideas on how to both solve that negligent hiring aspect and also deal with that one study out there that says it really has a disparate impact on communities of color, despite the fact that that is the opposite intent from what the legislation is. Well-intentioned, but still hurting the cause is not good. So, yes, sir.
I can give you a quick question. We have a need for truck drivers in South Carolina. And I've had conversations with many truck drivers and many folks that were defense attorneys in the insurance industry. And one of the things that will come into court is if you're driving a truck and you hit someone, your record is going to be used against you. And I've had conversations with legislators saying, you know, if it wasn't a driving charge and it didn't affect, why should that come in as evidence in court? But I understand why insurance companies and businesses would have a concern. So that is not a ban the box, but it is an example of problems. We are still going forward and going to train on that because there's companies that are willing to hire, but they will probably have to pay higher premiums because that will come into a court case, which is not really fair.
You're right. It will.
Mr. Chairman, briefly, I mean, that's a real issue that you've raised, the whole question of personal liability that the companies have. And I think the state legislatures are going to have to move to immunize those particular companies that reach out and employ returning citizens. They have to give them the leverage to do that. And also, we need to come up with some other incentives to give to employers and to make sure that they will be receptive to hiring people without records. But that's a real issue that has to be addressed.
Yes, sir. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
Mr. Chairman,
Thank
I ask
you.
a question?
Yes.
Sorry, I was in
Because I raised this issue initially. I wonder if this disparate effect is because while you don't know you don't know about the record, but the person has applied. So you know the race. So the reason for the disparate effect or the failure to hire may really be race and not the record, the record of the
That's exactly what that study indicated, but it has a negative impact on one of the very groups that you would be seeking to help. So. Again, under the heading well-intentioned, but this study may be an outlier. It may not be accurate. The judge is now an academic, and there may be 5 studies that debunk that one study. I don't want us to go down a road, if there's a way to fix that without having unintended negative consequences. But the lady from the District of Columbia is right. It was race-related, and that's what the study found. The gentleman from Wisconsin.
We will make America great again.